Hello once again, Idaho, and welcome back to another STEM Industry Check-In. I am Crispin Gravatt, the Research and Data Analyst over here at the Idaho STEM Action Center. We are glad to have you today, and we are very glad to be joined by the Community Education Manager for Midas Gold, Idaho, up in Donnelly. Welcome, Hayley Rambur. How are you today?
I am great, Crispin. How are you?
I am marvelous. Even better, now you're here. So to get started, why don't you tell the folks watching at home just a little bit about yourself, your background, and some of the work that is being done up at Midas Gold?
Yeah, of course. So like Crispin said, my name is Hayley Rambur, and I am the Community Education Manager for Midas Gold, Idaho. I am located up in Donnelly in Valley County, where I live with my 6-month-old son and my phenomenal husband, Ryan. We're very fortunate to live in Valley County. A lot of what brought us to Valley County was actually Midas Gold itself. So my background is in geology and secondary education, and I get to use both of those working for Midas Gold. A little bit about Midas Gold as a company. We are an Idaho-based company, so our corporate headquarters are now down in Boise, where we actually have an office there as well. During COVID, it's shut down and we're all working remotely. We also have one in Donnelly and then up at Stibnite, where our project site is located.
Awesome. So just to tie things all into our virtual STEM Matter Celebration Week, tell us a little bit about what STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, looks like at Midas Gold.
Yeah, of course. So at Midas Gold, so our project and our company was essentially built around Stibnite, which is a brownfield mining district here in Valley County. And so brownfield, meaning it's been mined pretty heavily actually for the past 100 years, and it has some environmental impacts and legacies that are left behind. So in that, we've compiled a team of roughly 35 Idahoans that work here and are raising our families here. And a majority of our backgrounds actually ranges pretty significantly. There's a lot of geologists, engineers, we have accountants, we have data analysts, all that focus around obviously our STEM careers. But on top of that, we actually have a lot of our supporting team and the rest of our staff that really have to take the STEM approach, right? We have a STEM focused project. So even if you're working in HR or accounting or communications within our company, you have to have that critical understanding and the communication capacity to really be able to understand what's going on and move that forward as our project progresses. So.
Right. So just like in your role as the community education manager, you can't really communicate or educate about the mining projects or the work of Midas Gold without that STEM background and that understanding of what the work actually is doing.
Yes, exactly. It's one of those things, that I was born and raised in Idaho, and I was the young little girl collecting rocks in her pockets everywhere I went, and I've been able to transition this in. And then with being able to communicate that, it's really, it's above my work that's in K through 12 schools or in higher education, but it's also we're not all geologists, we're not all engineers. What's the difference between a rock and a mineral? And so it's been a pretty cool project to be able to work for.
What is the difference between a rock and a mineral? Or I guess I can just take a geology course. So tell us about some of the work that is currently being done with Midas Gold.
Yeah, so we have one project site, which is the Stibnite Gold Project, like I said, located here in Valley County. We've been up there since 2009. And so as a mine project develops, you start in early exploration. So that's really defining the mineral resource, what's going on under the ground. Is it environmentally sound? Is it economically feasible? And then you essentially transition into submitting your applications. So our lead agency is the U.S. Forest Service, the Payette National Forest, where we submitted a plan of restoration and operations, and that kind of kicked off the permitting timeline. So in permitting our project, it's taking into account, so it's all of the science, the data, the analysis, but it's also getting feedback from regulators, agencies, local stakeholders, community members, and really trying to make the project the best that it can be. So that's environmentally, from a community standpoint, and really making those adjustments. And so that's where a lot of our engineers and our geologists are, really we go back to the books, right? So it's one of those critical thinking components that if A doesn't work, what does B and C look like to kind of make the best project that we can, not just as a company, but for Idaho as a whole. And so in that permitting world that we're in right now, if we receive a positive record of decision from the U.S. Forest Service, that kind of kicks off a whole new string of opportunities here in Valley County. So if we receive that positive record of decision, we will essentially start construction, which provides an opportunity to almost 500 new jobs here in Valley County. And then followed by the construction, building establishments of roads, power lines, site facilities. Will actually employ over 1,000 direct employees right here in Valley County. And so we're really, all of the construction and the building blocks, the data, the science, really is all tied into this permitting timeline right now. So
that's awesome. And it sounds like an impression that I would get just hearing the name Midas Gold would be, okay, this is an organization that just does mining. But it sounds like there's so much more that goes into a project like that, pulling from forestry and environmental science and ecology, pulling in accounting and economics and economic development, in addition to the geology and the technology that goes into mining. It sounds like a really all-encompassing field of work.
It really is. It's one of those projects. So what actually, when I talked about the early days of us looking, economically, what resources, minerals do we have in the ground? How much of the commodities do we have? But a big reason why our company was actually built and established to move forward with this project was because the environmental needs that were up at Stibnite. And it's water quality, it's legacy materials left from past mining that are degrading that water quality, it's environmental impacts. So we actually took a very modern approach to what mining means, right? We're not your grandfather's mining company. We've actually built in, if you go to our website, you'll see a lot of the backstory behind our project, but it's actually the term restoration. We've actually built into our project as we move along where we can address these legacy features early and properly in our project. So it's not just how much gold and how much antimony can we go mine, but what are environmental conditions like at site, and how can a mining company go in and fix those? And it's restoring fish passage to an area that hasn't seen native passage past the Yellow Pine pit since really World War II, when they started mining up there in the open pit at Yellow Pine. And it's really an adaptive approach that is really all encompassing to almost any STEM field you could find out there. So
that's awesome. And I love the phrase, not your grandfather's mining company. We're not out here panning for gold or anything. So it sounds like with so many different fields colliding on different projects and proposals, there might be some challenges related to finding a workforce to fill those roles. So what are some of those challenges to finding qualified workers?
Well, a lot of, we're on the state seal. You have a miner right there on it, right? Mining is a rich part of Idaho's history. And in past years, it's tapered off a little bit. And so a lot of the workforce that you see in the mining, industry, whether they're out of the Magic Valley and they're driving to Nevada, or they're going to Montana, or they're going to Alaska, a lot of our existing workforce is going to other states. And one of the commitments that we have as a company, and even as an industry within Idaho, is how do we hire local? How do we hire Idahoans and bring them back home? How can we bring their families back home? I'm a little bit biased, but I think Idaho is the best state out there. So I don't want to leave, but I also want to build a project that, can bring others back home. And when you start looking at what does that mean for a mining company, like you can make your assumptions of what's a given job, right? Are you an engineer? Are you a geologist? But it starts to go deeper, right? So there's, what are you looking at from a fisheries resource side of things? What are you looking at from a botanical resource? So what plants, from a forestry management, what type of timber resources are up there? What is it going to look like during operations? What's it going to look like during closure? It's accountants, it's HR, it's mechanics, right? It's diesel mechanics. it's heavy equipment operators. And so there's a lot of things where people would say, well, we don't have a qualified workforce in Idaho. And I would beg to differ. We really do. And sometimes it's providing those opportunities to Idahoans to grow and prosper where they want to be. And that's really where I see a solid strength with our project moving forward, is it gives people the opportunity. Say you live in the Treasure Valley. We'll roughly have a 2 weeks on, 2 week off work shift. You can still live there and you can come and work and prosper here instead of having to go to Nevada. It's a pretty exciting opportunity, and there's a lot of open doors out there related to STEM field or even beyond what those resources look like. So
that's awesome, giving opportunities for Idahoans to stay right here in the 43rd state chronologically, but the first in our hearts.
Yep.
So in addition to some of the challenges that we face and that Midas Gold faces to finding a qualified workforce today, we can see these challenges continuing on into the future. And through partnerships that we have at the Idaho STEM Action Center, we have the opportunity to begin to cultivate talent through our education system. So what are some ways that we can partner together, and what would you like to see from our education services here in Idaho looking forward?
Well, it's a great question. I'm a little bit biased in some of the platforms, but a big focus, I think, is as we move forward with partnerships and facilitating opportunities, a big focus of mine is really for our rural and our remote communities. It's providing that equal and opportunity access across our state. And there's been some phenomenal programs that have been running, whether it's through P3 partnerships, supporting after-school programs, science fair competitions, and then even with ISEF and providing, not just tools for the students, but tools for those educators to bring back to our communities. It's one of those, when you live in a small town, you wear a lot of hats. And so the reach goes far beyond just the classroom setting. And I think that's something that when we start looking at even just our industry, mining, within the state, the majority of our communities that are close or in proximity to the mining project are those rural and remote communities. And so in Valley County, the opportunities that we have and are able to provide now, even before we have a mining project, it establishes an interest, but it also establishes the concept that it's okay to look at the past, right? It's okay to look at, well, I tried to fly my rocket on this platform and it really didn't work. And instead of just being like, well, okay, I'm done, walk away, trying again, right? And that's really that foundation of STEM and why it matters in our rural and remote communities.
That's awesome. Instead of failing and giving up, just failing forward and finding the new ways to do things.
Yeah,
and
being adaptable.
You mentioned ISEF, which for folks watching at home who may not know what ISEF is, that is our Idaho Science and Engineering Fairs. And in partnership with organizations like Midas Gold, we host 3 regional fairs all throughout the state: northern, western, and eastern Idaho. And this provides high school students the opportunity to conduct original research aligned with their interests and present this in a competition format to represent their region of Idaho at the international competition. And this program also has a professional development component for educators to boost their efforts at instructing and mentoring students through this original research, design, and conduct process. And that has been a really powerful program that we are so happy to have organizations like Midas Gold sponsoring and supporting and mentoring students along the way. So looking forward once again, what are some of the biggest hopes for your work in Midas Gold, especially related to STEM education and STEM workforce?
I think it really revolves, as we're making these transitions and moving forward, it's workforce development. And it's something that I hold very near and dear to my heart because it's providing those opportunities to grow and prosper where you want to be, where you were born and raised. And that being said, it starts early. I've been in the classroom for roughly 4 years in after-school programming. And, a lot of people are like, okay, but they're in the 6th grade, they're in the 4th grade. they'll learn it in college if they want to be an engineer. They'll learn it in college if they want to be a geologist. And I think it's critically important that we start in the early ages and the beginning starts of their educational platform, right? And part of that being said is when you start thinking ahead, those grade levels are our next generation. They're the next generation of our engineers and our geologists and our scientists. And they're working not just for a mining company directly in our case, but they're working for the permitting agencies or consulting firms that work on mining projects. And overall, it's an approach that has a long-lasting impact on our state, right? Even far and beyond the reaches that you would normally imagine. And so I think as we transition forward, my biggest hope is that we're being able to provide a platform for the next generation to grow and prosper right here. Number one in our hearts.
Yeah, and a really interesting point that you just brought in was it's not just the Midas Gold. It's not just one company that is needing a skilled workforce in order to move forward on projects, because projects themselves are so heavily reliant on partnerships and creative coordination between business and industry and government and all of these different groups working together to ensure that projects are done in accordance with best practice and done in the best way possible. And I think that is a really, really important point as we look to ways to develop early learners and lifelong learners.
Well, and it's the early and the lifelong learners, but it also, it brings up a point of what does that workforce look like on our project, right? If it's Idahoans coming back, well, they're bringing their family back with them, right? And they're bringing their spouses. I know on some of the other calls that have been streamed this week on Facebook, a big concept is positions in the STEM field that we can't fill, right? So do we have qualified workers? Well, then you start looking, well, maybe not. But how do we start providing training opportunities? How do we start providing support to, technical degrees also? And what does that training look like? But there's also the trickle-down effect is when you start having, tech firms that are based in Idaho, when you start having projects at our scale and capacity, well, there's also spouses that come along, right? And so when you think about it, so I'm a geologist and my husband's a forester and wildland firefighter. So when you start looking at what the package deal comes like, when you start really providing those STEM opportunities, I think it'll really start noticing a change within our state of being able to fill some of those other STEM roles by providing opportunities for Idahoans to stay and work here. So.
Awesome. I love the package deal concept. And it does, looking forward, it does provide some resiliency, some economic and cultural resiliency for communities across the state, especially in rural areas like Donnelly.
Yep. Well, exactly. We start looking even, coming from a timber side of things, right? Like Valley County was built on the timber and mining industry. And when you start seeing those mills close and you start seeing projects going away, what does that do for those younger, the working age employees? Do they stay here or do they have to go somewhere else to raise their family? So it really is a big important area in my heart, at least from a rural community side of things, is providing those opportunities to not just have a job, but to have a well-paying job. The statistics around how much, in the STEM field, the average pay over other fields, but it's a longevity for not just an individual, but for their family and their future.
Yeah, STEM jobs pay about twice as much as non-STEM jobs on average. So looking at all of these projects and partnerships, what, in your view, are some of the most important skill sets that we should be equipping our future workforce with? It's
something that I've thought a lot about, especially in the past couple of years, on skill sets. Is it a degree, right? Is it an engineering degree? Is it a geology degree? Is it a biology degree? Is it something that is spelled out where you clearly know that you're entering a STEM workforce, right? And obviously those, for some components of our employment opportunities, those are going to be required, right? An educational or experience in that field is going to come along with it. But a big part of it that's, expands from STEM itself is how are people critical thinkers? So what is making them, so can you go into your job every single day and get from A to Z? Yes. Well, but what happens if they throw in a 1, 2, and a 3? and how can you adapt to those? And it's something that as we, go through our everyday, it's something that as we're adapting, that even if you're, a heavy equipment operator, most people wouldn't necessarily associate that with a STEM field. But when you're working on a mining project, there's a lot of components that go in there. And so it's really that critical thinking, that exception of, well, if A doesn't work, what does B and C look like? And it's something that I think that I, hold up there in very high regards, is being able to think through in a critical process. It's not just benefiting, us as a company, right? But also our communities and our state as a whole, because it sets that and raises that standard. When you have that expectation to go above and beyond, whether it's from a community standpoint or it's from an environmental standpoint, it's really important. And it's something that you mentioned earlier in my role, right? Having a geology degree makes it pretty easy for me to be able to communicate on the mining side of things. Mm-hmm. That's not always the case in a STEM field. And so I think that adaptability and that critical thinking component is really up there.
I could not agree more. So how can folks learn more about Midas Gold, some of the projects you're working on, and maybe look for employment?
It's a great time. So actually, we have our website, so midasgoldidaho.com, that you can always go to. Something that our team has adapted with COVID-19 is being virtual, right? So we're not going to the community meetings. We're not giving the in-person presentations like we have in the past. And so we've actually added on a webinar component. And a lot of this was, in the transparency and being able to communicate with community members of the public, on all aspects of our project. What does it look like from a Stibnite Gold Project 101? Where in the world is Stibnite and what is it? All the way to, how our tailing storage facility is going to be designed and where our power line's going to run, our offsite infrastructure. We actually have some that are recorded on our website, and we are kicking them off for 2021 as well. So they are completely open to the public. You can find them on our Facebook page or on our website. There's another prong, because I'm a little bit biased, because I am the tour guide. Fingers crossed with a COVID safe and socially distanced component in the near future. Like I said, fingers crossed. We actually, for the past several years, have offered a tour program where we can get people boots on ground at site. And I think that's something that's really important to understand our project, the historical impacts that are already there, the environmental degradation that's going on, and how our plan addresses and moves that forward. If COVID does not allow for a tour season, there's also a video. We have some virtual tours of our project as well.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to the day that I can pop up there and get an in-person safe tour of the grounds. And I look forward to learning more. Before we wrap up, is there anything else that you would like to let the folks watching at home know about Midas Gold?
I don't think so. I think one of the biggest things is I just want to thank you for inviting me and letting me be on here and talk a little bit more about STEM and not just Midas Gold, but the mining industry as a whole within our state. If there's any questions, we have an email where you can email me directly or at community@midasgoldinc.com. Whether it's interests in, do we have intern opportunities? What is it going to look like for our workforce? How can you apply? What is the best training that you can have in hopes to come work for us? I'm always here and happy to help. So
awesome. Well, Hayley Rambur, the Community Education Manager for Midas Gold, Idaho, thank you so much for joining us today, and happy STEM Matters Week.
Right back at you, Crispin. Thank you.
All right. Be sure to join us later today for even more check-ins with different individuals and organizations about the STEM economy and some of our programming, as well as more features throughout the week. Until next time, I'm Crispin Gravatt, and happy STEM Matters Week to everyone watching at home.